Movies, Recovery, and the Stories That Connect Us, featuring Ted Perkins. What role can movies play in addiction recovery? In this episode, Ted Perkins, author of Addicted in Film, Movies We Love About Habits We Hate, and creator of Recovery Movie Meetups, joins the podcast to discuss how film can become a meaningful tool for healing, reflection, and recovery engagement. Drawing from a background in Hollywood as both a studio executive and screenwriter, Ted shares how his own recovery journey inspired him to watch 100 films focused on addiction and recovery over 100 days. That experience eventually evolved into a book, discussion guides, and a growing program now being used in treatment settings around the world. This conversation explores how movies help people process addiction and recovery, the balance between realism and glorification in film, recovery is a heroic transformation story, why storytelling creates emotional connection and insight, how recovery movie meetups become a structured clinical intervention, and the future of AI-generated storytelling in treatment and recovery spaces. From classic films to emerging technology, this episode examines how storytelling continues to shape the way people understand addiction, mental health, and recovery.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Before we learn about this episode's guest, I want to take a quick minute to share something exciting. Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast now offers free continuing education credits for select episodes. Currently approved through IPGGC for gambling counseling credentials, with more approving bodies on the way. You can check out what's available at andrewjschreier.com/continuing-education. I'm really proud of what we built there, and I can't wait to share more with you. Now, let's get into today's conversation. Ted Perkins is the CEO and founder of Recovery Movie Meetups, an innovative program that transforms Hollywood films into structured, clinically meaningful mutual support experiences for addiction and mental health treatment. A longtime Hollywood screenwriter and media executive, his work bridges storytelling and behavioral health, using film to spark insight, emotional engagement, and lasting change. Perkins created Recovery Movie Meetups out of his own lived experience with alcohol use disorder, depression, and the psychological toll of constant what-if thinking, both personally and professionally as a writer. Drawing on the principles of cinema therapy, he developed a model that uses carefully curated films to help individuals explore addiction, mental health challenges, and recovery in a more accessible and less confrontational way. His program is now used in hundreds of treatment centers, recovery community organizations, sober homes, schools, and correctional settings across the United States and Canada. By combining film with guided discussion and structured workbooks, Perkins has created a scalable approach that helps participants identify with characters, examine their own behaviors, and engage more deeply in the recovery process. He is also the author of Addicted in Film, Movies We Love About the Habits We Hate, and continues to advance the use of narrative and visual storytelling as powerful tools for self-reflection, connection, and transformation in behavioral health. You can learn more about Ted Perkins and ways to connect with him in the podcast notes. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, I want to welcome Ted Perkins. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's always nice to see you, Andrew, and thanks for having me, and excited to speak to your audience.
Yeah, before we do, we're going to talk about a couple of things, actually. We're going to talk about a book that you wrote. We're going to talk about another unique thing that you have created and that you've shared with everybody. Before we do all that, can you just give the audience a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. Well, I worked in Hollywood for many years. First I started as a studio executive at Universal Studios and Warner Brothers. I did international production. I made movies in China and Latin America, Spain, India, couple different weird places, and had a lot of fun. And then I did so. I was a public speaker. I gave film seminars and workshops around the world, and taught at universities about how to create stories and craft screenplays and create pitches and get financing for movies. And then I was a screenwriter too for many years. I did a pretty good job as a screenwriter, made a pretty tidy living. I had a sector that I wrote for kind of like a niche, which was the Latin market for a while, which we're trying to develop. So I had a couple movies that came out were like pretty big hits at the box office. So it was fun. And then that life was great until, all the partying and everything got me into trouble. So then I got into the recovery sector. And so that's where I'm now in behavioral health.
That's great. Thanks for sharing all that. And you get to get a sense of your background with all the films and the movies and stuff. When you read the book Addicted in Film, Movies We Love About the Habits We Hate. Can you share with the audience a little bit about what inspired or motivated you to write a book about films in which depict addiction?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was actually just, it came out of, what happens when you first get sober, which is you have a lot of time, obviously. Backing up a little bit, I've been going in and out of, long periods of sobriety and then relapsing. And just, it's like this silly cycle. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with that. If they're in recovery, in the stages of change model, you sort of go forward and you commit it, and then you sort of backtrack a little bit. But I don't really get to the finish line. But the way I got to the finish line was a little bit unique. Was that on one of those mornings that I was just like particularly like just kind of fed up with everything, I decided that instead of the 90 meetings in 90 days that most people recommend if you're into the 12-step programs, and I've been to hundreds of 12-step programs, hundreds of smart recovery meetings. And I just decided to do a challenge to watch 100 movies in 100 days. But not just like movies, but movies about addiction, recovery, mental health, etc. And so I watched them all, and along the course of that, I learned a lot of stuff, and I saw a lot of things that I thought were really interesting about recovery. And I've been working for Smart Recovery. I knew a lot about the recovery sector. I'm also a Smart Recovery facilitator. I've read every book that you can get your hands on about addiction. And so I wanted to realize that nobody had ever written a book about, all the great movies that were made about addiction, and recovery. And so I decided to, like, I had time on my hands. So it was one of those things where you're like, oh, so it's in my bucket list is to make a movie. Okay, did that. Wrote a movie, did that. Wrote a novel, haven't done that yet. Write a nonfiction book. Okay, I can do that. So I did, and that was movies we love about we have addicted in film, and then published it, self-published it, and I learned how to self-publish a book and went through all of that. It was great. It's a great learning process. For anybody who wants to publish a book, it's not a bit about time.
And when I started reading the book, and you and I met and talked a little bit about beforehand, and I mentioned this to you, is as soon as I started reading it, it definitely took me down memory lane because I worked in group homes, halfway houses, residential, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of time outside of all those different services that we were offering, and I wanted to talk to you about something that you wrote about was early, like right away. This is like page 2. Said
Uh-huh.
addiction is also part of a vast intellectual landscape that includes everything from neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy to ethics, morality, and spiritualism. All these disciplines have different ways of understanding and explaining addiction. In other words, they're telling us different stories about it, and because of their scope and popular appeal, movies are one of the best ways to tell these stories. And then I think about someone can write a book, someone could write a poem, could draw a picture, a song, and we see that as such a way to understand addiction, but yet I thought for a long time people looked at films as like a substitute teacher in treatment and recovery. Like it was the thing that you would do if like there's not like maybe you got through the curriculum early or maybe you but like it to me wasn't taken very serious as we can learn from this. But yet the way you described it is this is exactly why we can learn from this. So what's your take on that from how this is so important in such a way that art and film and everything storytelling, but yet it was sort of not really recognized as like something that would be helpful or needed or at least valid in that space.
Mm. Well, I think the answer is that these are, throughout history, people, artists, whatever, have tried to create renditions of human experiences as a way to inform, educate, inspire, or just tell stories. Because stories are the central mechanism of human behavior. When 20,000 years ago, they're sitting in a cave trying to figure out what they're going to have to eat. They haven't eaten for 30 days, and they're all starving. What do we do? And then somebody stands up and tells a story like, okay, like we should go to this other tribe and they have fruits and vegetables, and let's make a treaty with them, or let's kill them all and take all their food, and it's going to go great. And so what that person's doing is creating a thought experiment for other people and telling a story about how they predict the future. And usually they're predicting a good future. And then people are forming their own thought experiments around it and then acting on it, forming beliefs about it and then acting. And the idea of pitching something goes to everything, politics, society. Everything starts with a conversation where somebody is selling a vision of the future. All the great titans of industry sold a vision of the future. All the great, like Steve Jobs, Bezos, all these people, the most powerful people on the planet, have used the ability to tell a story, usually for good. Obviously, Hitler was telling a terrible story and Goebbels was telling a terrible story. It worked really well for a while until it didn't. And so you can bastardize that ability and use it for evil as well. But everybody's recognized that communicating a story is a way to motivate people to change and do things and change society ultimately, like fundamentally alter society. And so very early on, people have used poems, plays, everything as a way to convey stories, as a way to create thought experiments in people's minds. In a text-based format, people would write, and when you read a novel, you're creating a story, you're creating your own movie in your own head, what that looks like for you. That's why when movie adaptations come out in books, everybody's either like usually probably disappointed because they had like a much different view of what that story was about because they created a thought experiment in their own mind as to what it looked like. Other times it's much better than people's thought experiments, and they see. But the idea that you can convey things through different media has been great. Now, technology limited people to text and drawings and art, what they had available until film came around. And then, technically speaking, the medium had all these different tools to help people actually not just, help people create thought experiments in their own minds, but to actually render those thought experiments incarnate on a screen in movies. And so early on, movies were seen from one side of the spectrum as something that could be very important to change people, human behavior, or whatever. Leonard Riefenstahl used movies perfectly to sell fascism and Nazi Germany. He's a master. But on the good side, people saw that movies could change human behavior. But early on, realized that the cost of making movies was such that making movies purely to change human behavior was probably not a good business. And also, there was a concern that movies seen as propaganda. Is that the best use of using movies? And so the commercial aspect of Hollywood kind of took over. There's a great book about this called How the Jews Invented Hollywood. Phenomenal book about the history of Hollywood and the Jewish diaspora from New York that came from the Carney and the carnival scenes and the theaters and sort of like the entertainment vaudeville racket back in New York, moved all west and created Hollywood and created the business. They realized that film entertainment that was accessible, fun, etc., lighthearted and entertaining. So film sort of got the racket that it's not really serious art; it's just entertainment, and it is largely it is entertainment. But within that quest to create entertainment. There's a lot of artists and filmmakers that have realized that you could make an entertaining movie that also had a lot of meat on the bone, but also had different things to say. Now, they've always sort of, run the gauntlet of like, well, I want to make a point about social justice, or I want to make a point about racial equality, or I want to make a point about whatever. But you can't just create a movie that hits people over the head with those messages. You have to sort of put those nuggets of information and embed them within the story so that it's a natural thing that people, when they watch the movie, they exclude those messages themselves and then take ownership of it. And in so doing, those messages change their perception of the world. So, Burning Mississippi or, Beloved or Color Purple or all these other movies had a great deal of influence of what people thought about racial segregation. Other movies have done the same about politics. Other movies have done the same about female equality. Other movies have done the same about global warming. And critics are always on the lookout for movies that have a message. But it's okay to have a message. And the point of my book is that a lot of really great filmmakers took a lot of risks to make movies about a hard topic like mental health or addiction or recovery. And were able to view those movies not just with entertainment value or narrative and story value, but also messages about, addiction and how to get help and how to feel clear and how to solve the problem and what it looks like. And all of those things were in those movies. So I wanted to sort of write a book about how a lot of those movies have come out and done a lot to actually change public opinion about a lot of things, and also helped individual people who watch those movies, including myself. And so I just want to share those stories. And I think, unfortunately, when people have thought that Hollywood is the problem in addiction, it shows, Euphoria shows people taking drugs and partying, and that's bad. The moms against, entertainment, etc. There's always going to be like a fringe of people that see that Hollywood is bad. Just like the people who think that, elementary school shootings are caused by, video games. Maybe it's not, but the point is that a medium can also be used for a tremendous amount of good. And so Euphoria and other, shows, they're actually showing the downside of addiction and partying. They're trying to convey messages of atonement, that retribution, that accountability, that repercussions and consequences eventually will accrue. And so most filmmakers are responsible because they're showing reality in the sense that nobody gets a free lunch. Like you're not seeing movies out there where, I mean, maybe you do, like Back to the Party 2, where everybody gets drunk or The Hangover, where everybody gets drunk and it's okay and order is restored at the end. They keep on drinking for the rest of their life. But most movies are quite the opposite. They're trying to convey common social values of, hey, if you have a problem, get help. Hey, addiction's not a good thing. Hey, drug abuse, not cool. Hey, going to prison and ruining your family, not cool. Hey, going to Vegas and blowing $1 million from your trust fund and then turning around and blowing your kid's college education because you are addicted to gambling, not cool. So all those messages are imbued into movies as
I
well.
think that
So
was I think that was a big assumption too, that even our professionals in our field and people in the work that do like addiction recovery, mental health, all that type of stuff, is that like all of a sudden you can talk about all the drinking you've done or all the drugging you've done, but like we can't show it. We can't, like there's this whole idea of like glorifying it, showing it, like this can be a risk to others. Like there was this so much, like you could sit and talk so much about it, or you could get into all the details about what you've done, but all of a sudden if we're gonna show a movie of it, like whoa, 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 this might encourage it. And I'm like, I don't know if people need a movie to encourage them to do it. They've already been doing it. But also
you
like
know,
so
I
to
don't
me it
know.
was I felt like those were the things that sort of pushed movies as something that people can connect with and learn from, to it doesn't belong here. Even though outside of, you could say, your recovery and your treatment, a lot of people love movies, and like it is a big important thing. So I'm when you wrote about all that stuff, I was so fascinated by, you talked about even like producers, directors, you talked about actors, and risks that people took to make this happen and to do this film. Ones that I was so familiar with, ones that I've shown in treatment programs, to ones I never heard about. So I think I thought I knew things when I showed these films. And I got the sense that after reading your book, I got a lot more understanding of what went into this film or what was meant to this film instead of
Mhm.
a stereotypical view of what substance use in films is.
Yeah. Um, I think it is, it's a good observation. A lot of people just see movies from a very surface level of what they constitute. But producers for many, many years have always been trying to insert, pro-social or profound messaging into movies. It's an art form as to how to insert that, like I said, without, hitting people over the head with it. Audiences are very sophisticated. They know exactly when they're being preached to. And people don't like being preached to. And we can go into this a little bit later when we talk about recovery movie meetups, which is that when people get immersed in a story and they get some form of messaging that changes them, when the movie's over, they internalize that messaging, and then it becomes their messaging, and then it becomes a decision that they take for their own, and then it becomes deeply personal. In religion, it would be the person who has like an encounter with prayer during a Sunday service, and they have their encounter with Jesus or whatever. And then they internalize that, and that's their personal relationship with the deity or whatever. It's very powerful, but it's personal. The same thing happens in movies. The experience of internalizing a message becomes theirs. And then the conviction that flows from that is much more powerful. So it's like, I saw this, it changed how I perceive myself and my situation and why I want to change and how I'm going to change. And now I'm going to change. And that becomes part of them. And the movie has helped them do that. But it's not that like the movie told them to do it. The movie helped them figure that out for themselves. And then it's their decision, not the movie telling them to do anything. Because nobody would admit to having a movie made me do this. Nobody wants to admit that. But it's actually quite true. And the Recovery Movie Meetups program, which we'll talk about soon, that's exactly the point.
Yeah. That's it's incredible. And the fact that you even acknowledge that the audiences can kind of know when that's happening or what they want out of it is so important and key. Yeah, I have two more questions about the book before we move on to recovery meetups. Was it difficult for you to which which movies to pick, which ones to leave out? Were there ones where I wish I would have put this one in there? I imagine there was a point where you had to be like, nope, this is the list. And what that selection process was like, because you also cover so much, right? Like addiction, recovery. You talk about just even social use of some things. You talk about gambling, eating, talk about tobacco. So you cover so much and how this is depicted in film. How was that for you to make that final cut of what was going to be discussed or really elaborated on versus ones that you may have mentioned but didn't get like its own chapter? Just curious, how was that for you in that whole process?
Well, it was it was hard. It was actually quite simple because I'd already watched 100 movies, so I had a vast, selection of movies to come from. The thing was, when you're writing about a movie or getting things out of it, some movies have like, 10 things that have like 10 sort of axial moments or scenes or elements that recommend it. Like a movie like Lost Weekend has so much going on in it. There's so many different things. Like if you're in the recovery sector, so there's a codependence, enabling, psychosis, withdrawal, bargaining, criminality, existential questions, suicidal ideation. It's just like it's like a great movie because it has so many things. So that's an easy one. But there's another movie, like for instance, Drugstore Cowboy. People have asked me, why don't you write about Drugstore Cowboy? I'm like, well, because it seems drug use and yeah, it has, but it's only got like two or three things that I think are really important about it. And ultimately, it doesn't have like a great super redeeming message. Another example of that is Barfly with Mickey Rourke. And now, wonderful movie to watch. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but the movie ends with everybody at a bar drinking, and nothing has really changed. Nobody goes to rehab. It sort of reinforces this notion that, like, we're all going to die, so we might as well die happy. That's not something that I think is really helpful or valuable. I don't think that there's anything to be learned from the movie. Outside of the fact that you could watch the movie and feel bad for Faye Dunaway and Mickey Rourke and say, God, those people are like really, really addicted to alcohol. Their lives are miserable. I guess that's what they want. That's what they get. Thank God it's not me. Every movie has like, something to get out of it. And so I just wanted to find movies that really had enough things going on in them that it would be enough to write about. And so that's why the selection process for Recovery Movie Meetups is very stringent. It has to have like, it has to meet certain criteria. So it had to meet certain criteria for me. Also, I couldn't write about 100 movies. So I had to segment them into blocks about what they're all about. And I read about, quite frankly, for instance, in a chapter about sex addiction, there's really not that many movies about sex addiction. There's Shame and a couple of others, and Thanks for Sharing, that's which I write about. But there's other movie which I found that I would never include in the Recovery Movie Meetups program because it's such a profane movie, but um, a John Waters movie, I can't remember the name now, but it's a wonderful movie about sex addiction and paraphilia that sort of really pokes fun at social mores and obsession about sex, etc. It's a stupid movie. I mean, it's John Waters. It's hilariously over the top. But there's a lot of stuff in there that critics or nobody would ever write about because they're just looking at what it is, which is just kind of a gross out movie. But there's a lot of stuff going on in that movie that I wanted to write about. And John Waters is actually a friend of mine, and I never thought that I'd be writing about one of his movies. We used to hang out in airport lounges and before we went to Cannes and go to parties while we were in Cannes. He's just a great guy. But
Was that A Dirty Shame? Is that the movie you're referencing?
yeah, A Dirty Shame.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, don't. You could live your whole life without seeing that and be perfectly fine. But if you read my book and then watch the movie, you realize, but it's a great example of how even in stupid stuff and crappy sort of profane exploitative things, and movies from John Waters are largely trying to be exploitative, whatever they mean, or provocative. But even within that, he's trying to say something important. He's trying to poke fun at Maury's double standards, the hypocrisy, social morale, sexual morality, the religious right. People who are just who are just like so hung up about sex. He just sort of blew the doors open on that one. So, I mean, if you're if you're more worried about sex or very controlled and you're very Christian in that regard and you think people have to act a certain way, this is not the movie for you. But if you think that, if you look at sex as something that's just part of natural human behavior, it's a great movie. Actually, it's the first movie that ever explained paraphilia. If you don't know what paraphilia is, it's people who find sexual gratification in other things. And not necessarily bestiality, that's a different subset. It's a part of paraphilia. But there's a lot of people who like kissing and making out with their cars, and they find that that is very satisfactory for them. Who would judge anybody as to how they find pleasure in life? You know, sad is the man whose pleasures depend on the approval of another person. Madonna. um,
Yeah. I was last question about the book, and it's right at the end. This was in your final thought. I was really taken back at this part of it when you write about heroism. So I want to read a little about this because you talk about when you taught screenwriting, you always told your students that uh, the key to a great film is heroism. What they can do, what they do can be something as big as saving the world from alien invasion or as seemingly small as changing a light bulb. But whatever it is, really doing it requires courage, resolve, commitment, and honest desire to change. Now, this is easy to see in the films, right? With the hero. But this is where you really stuck it to heart was successful recovery from addiction requires all those things and more. Recovery is an act of heroism. I'm surprised there aren't more movies made about it. for now, I'm pleased to have shared some of the ones that were. I think often the people that are struggling with substance use or mental health or whatever the thing may be, they're not used to being called heroes. And here you do. And I thought that was so profound in how you concluded that final thought. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I was so taken back at that messaging.
Thanks for quoting. The To me, all human endeavor, and this is, and I think it leads to what I was talking about before, is that waking up and getting through the day is an act of heroism. Getting from my car to Target to buy toilet paper discounted is an act of heroism. The change, any change in entropy, going from a high entropy state to a low entropy state, from chaos to order, is is always an act of heroism. And like it might not seem heroic, but think about the elements. And these are the elements of the story. You start with a situation which is chaotic, disingenuous, dishonest, and not optimal. And then the person, that the hero, has to make a tough choice. Do they stay in that quagmire of self-doubt, dishonesty, or addiction, let's say? Or do they commit to change? And then in changing, they cross a threshold into a new and mysterious world, which is why all movies are about a journey in some regard. And this is all drawn from the hero's journey, um, from the template that screenwriters use. This is all based on sort of the work of Joseph Campbell and others. And so then, with this world, you have to make changes, and you confront enemies, you confront conflict. The conflict you confront is not just an enemy without, but it's an enemy within. You overcome your own limitations, you overcome your own biases, you overcome your own faulty thought patterns or lack of courage or dishonesty. You take it on, you confront it, you realize you're honest about what it is, and then you commit to overcome. You also fight with Darth Vader or whatever the oppositional forces are. And that requires courage, commitment, and understanding that you can change. Even when things look bleak, you still have to keep fighting and never give up. And if you go through all those tests and trials and you make it all the way to the Target aisle to buy toilet paper on discount, then you've won that battle. Or if you get all the way to the end of treatment and you've sobered up and you've committed and you go back to your family and they hug you and say, "Welcome back from your 30-day rehab." And you're like, you know what? I'm going to go back and get that job back, and I'm going to apologize to all the people that I harmed. And then I'm going to go get a master's degree and become the CEO of the very same company that fired me because I really believe in myself now when I didn't before. Or any of the million of other permutations of fantastic heroic endings that people encounter all the time. It's just everybody is going through a process of a three-act structure of heroism in everything that they do every day. Some things could be mundane, going to buy gasoline. Okay. But, or others can be profound. Jeff Bezos creating Amazon and being a multi-billionaire, or any of the other permutations. It all start with a story, which is Jeff Bezos wakes up and says, "I'm going to do something with my life. I don't like working at this financial institution. I've got an idea to change the world with online commerce. I can't find any money. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. Nobody's going to put their information, credit card information into an online portal. I'm going to lose money. Oh, wait, but I do believe in myself. I really think that can help. Even though everybody's telling me I'm nuts, I'm still going to persist." And it goes on and on until finally he's Jeff Bezos and he's worth as much as he is, and he's changed the landscape. And now, what like Jeff Bezos is immaterial. The fact is that all human success stories, all human endeavors, all the creation of capital in the world, the creation of wealth, is centered around a three-act structure. It starts with a conversation and a vision of the future, and then it's carried through into the actualization of that potential future through effort, hard work, conflict, and heroism.
That's great. You speak on that so well and profoundly of those little everyday things. And I just really appreciated that aspect of how you concluded it. That I think a lot of the people who are, using substances, struggling with it, wherever they are in their journey, are not often used to being called heroes. And that message should be shared more frequently. So thanks for really pointing that out.
Well, absolutely. I mean, think about it. You know what they're doing. You know, they're changing their entire lives. You know, how many times in a person's life do they have to fundamentally change their life? Think about how difficult that is. And more importantly, if you change your life, you have to create a new life. Most people sort of just wander the vast majority of people go to school, get a job, get married, wait for retirement, get Social Security, go into a nursing home, and die. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of different things that could happen, big changes that people never embark upon. People have all these hidden desires to try new things, to go on America's Got Talent, to create their own company, that they want to stay in a safe environment for whatever reason. And that's okay. I'm not judging anybody for staying in the rut or working for the man or whatever it is. Those are great people having wonderful lives. And I'm not here to, nobody's here to judge, but there's a lot of people who fundamentally want to do something different. They feel that they have a higher calling, that maybe, they were meant to do something better. Or even if they weren't meant to do something better, maybe they could create something new. They might give them fulfillment. And of course, it's going to be very risky. Of course, they might lose everything. Of course, they might flop, they might fail. But so many people are so afraid of failure that they never change at all. And then it becomes what's worse is that when people know that they could have changed, and they let 30 years go by without ever trying that thing that they really wanted to try, then it creates such a tension and remorse in people that becomes part of like the tragedy of non-activity, of non-acting. And that is also one of the things that drives addictive behaviors later in life, is the regret of never having tried. And I posit that, I would rather fail at 15 things than never have tried any of them. And that's just me. But other people are different, have different modalities of dealing with things. Fundamentally, when you go into treatment, you're fundamentally changing your life. And then you have to create a whole new life when you're out of treatment to stay sober, to be happy, to wrong the rights, or right the wrongs, and create a new identity. New identity creation is really tough. You think about it. I think the toughest part of recovery is creating an entirely new identity from scratch. You get a blank piece of paper, you got a pen in your hand, like, today I'm going to do what? I'm going to be what? I need to learn what? And you have so many things that are telling you that's stupid. You have people telling you that's stupid. You have life and AI saying you'll never get there. But then you realize, wait, I just have courage. I have to learn. I have to do. I have to act. I have to talk. I have to reach out. I have to do stuff. My recovery was to just do that. Write a book, create a company, walk the dogs, whatever it is, do something. The best advice my father ever gave me when I was in a rut, he said, doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter if it's walking the dogs, swimming, or creating a new multi-billion dollar company. Whatever it is, just do something. And one of my favorite quotes from Goethe who says, in initiative, there's something really amazing about initiative. Once you do start something, all these things sort of start following you and pushing you forward. All the things that you felt were irrelevant in your life suddenly become very relevant. And all the people that you thought would never be able to help you suddenly are helping you. And all the things that you ignored all your life thinking they were trivial or mediocre. Suddenly those things become very valuable and you realize that you've just been blind to possibilities your whole life because you haven't been asking the right questions or you haven't been open to information. And that's what sobriety does. It opens you up to all these things to help you move forward. Because now you're not living with blinders on. Addiction is sort of like just the equivalent of putting on blinders and living in a cave thinking things are going to get better when they're not. So I use the cave metaphor quite a bit. In fact, I just did a presentation in Sacramento where I start with like the story of Recovery Movie Meetups starts in a cave 50,000 years ago where people were starving and they had to change and they didn't know what to do. And somebody stood up and said, wait, I've got an idea. That's the whole genesis of Recovery Movie Meetups and everything I'm all about.
And that You put it in such an interesting way that I don't think people look at what it takes. And I think you make it so when you explain that, you make it so easy to see how challenging it is and how tough it is. And that's exactly why we become the hero, right? So I really appreciate that. I don't think people speak enough about that importance in this particular area and the area of substance use, mental health, and treatment and everything. So I really appreciate that. Now, the only thing isn't just the book you wrote, but then
Mhm.
we've already given a highlight to recovery meetups. So talk to us
Mhm.
about what that is and where that's been, because not only have you taken, hey, it's okay to watch a movie and learn about something, or it's okay to um, show something about substances, but you made it into something even more. Talk to us about that.
Well, after I published the book, I started getting people calling me and emailing me, saying, you know what, we're using your book in these meetings, and we're talking about movies and showing movies, and we're using chapters from your book. And I thought that was just delightful. I thought, wow, that's great. And then I had the idea, and then one person should give her should give her credit. Her name was Carly Mock from Canada, in Saskatchewan, of all places. She said, a couple of questions, like discussion questions that would help us, frame the discussions. I was like, I can do that. And so I wrote a couple of discussion questions out. And I realized that I really enjoyed the didactic nature of posing questions, because posing questions is like posing thought experiments for people. And so I realized that there was something that I could do that would be able to take all the movies, or a lot of the movies that I'd watched, and create discussion guides and discussion questions and instructions and contests and stories about these movies specifically and why they're important and what people get out of them, and put them into a sort of like a didactic discussion format for like a workbook. And then that workbook for one chapter became 24 movies for Recovery Movie Meetups substance use program. And then we did another 24 movies for mental health. Now we just did another 10 movies for families. Now we're doing a whole process addiction edition coming out next, next fall, this coming fall. We've got the trauma informed edition that we're doing with Claudia Black. It's just snowballed into, there's just so many different ways that we could use these workbook exercise formats for all these great movies. We talked about just a plethora of behavioral health challenges that people are undergoing every day. And that's what it's turned into. Recovery Movie Meetups now. We're in like hundreds of facilities all over the world. It's crazy.
Yeah, did that to me, I don't know if you got that, but to me, like that sort of is like this is the proof that like movies belonged all along. Like it that this is sort of not that it
Mhm.
needed validation, but the fact that it wasn't just like a okay, it's okay to watch a movie and we can have this in a treatment setting, we can have this in a incarcerated setting, but no, we can actually take it a step further and really discuss it and learn from it and have dialogue. That to me, like, it just seems like it came full circle to what you first wrote about on page like 2 about what
Mhm.
movies can do. And now it sees it doing this in not the substitute teacher way that I think it was
Yeah.
viewed for a while.
It's interesting is that, and I hear this all the time, is that a lot of the clients that we have said, we've always used movies. We would put on a movie every so often, but we really wouldn't talk about it. We would just kind of put it on, and sometimes people would. And then I also heard other people say, "Well, I was in treatment. They put on this movie, but then they didn't like tell us why we were watching it. We had no discussion afterwards. It was just sort of like substitute teacher. It was just they pressed the play button, walked away, came back when it was over, and said, "Okay, guys, time to go to bed." Nothing. It didn't really help us. In fact, kind of pissed us off because it made us think about drugs and alcohol because we're watching these scenes. But see, that was because it was improperly implemented. So our recovery movie meetup sort of solves that problem by making it into a clinical intervention. a much more formal therapeutic, evidence-based intervention that has a setup, a context, discussion questions. And in fact, some of our clients actually bill insurance for it because it qualifies as cognitive behavioral therapy sessions after a movie because you're discussing in a movie, but you're discussing your own recovery situation and your own triggers, etc. So it's been used improperly for many years and very informally. And so we didn't solve a problem that existed. Wasn't always a problem for everybody. But people, our clients have seen us saying, well, we'd like to show movies, but we didn't know how. But now we do with your program. So we've been able to get a lot of clients who have already had a predisposition to show movies. And a lot of our clients have never even considered showing movies, but they have a big screen TV that's on. People are watching hockey and infomercials and shit like that. And of course, there's liquor advertising and all this other stuff which is triggering them, and it's a time waste, it's a time suck. And they think, well, what better use for TV and the big commentary is to get everybody together on a Friday night, watch, have some popcorn and turn it into an intervention that they could build to insurance. But not just for the logistical or financial reasons, but for the fact that it actually can help their clients. You know, one thing that we try to stress is that we're not just like selling a program and licensing. We are doing that, but we're really actually in the business of trying to change people's lives fundamentally so that they can really change and go on. And I think the Recovery Movie Meetups is had great strides in helping a lot of people. I wish I had extra interviews for how many people have been helped by this program. And because people are anonymous, we don't collect data on best outcomes. But all of our clients tell us that the clients really, really get a lot out of it. They really enjoy it. Importantly, it's a little bit of a bait and switch because people looking forward to treatment. And when was the last time somebody in rehab was like, I can't wait to go to my next group meeting? Maybe somebody does, but a lot of them is like, wah, wah. Bob, talk about your feelings. Tell us about your drug use. Okay, well, and everybody's listening to them like, no, that's why a lot of 12-step meetings, smart recovery meetings become very monotonous because it's like people talking and, sucking up time. Recovery meetups is something sort of like the antidote to that because you're talking about what they've just seen and exciting and everybody can be their own movie critic. They can talk about the movie, how it relates to them. And it makes people talk. And so one of the outcomes of our program is that people who are normally just like stuck in a corner, like Scott's like this, not wanting to talk, are suddenly the ones that are blabbering for 15 minutes about how this relates to their life. And that, to us, is just a phenomenal outcome. And for the clinicians, the facilitators, it's the one thing that most people don't talk about. There's a lot of staff turnaround in treatment facilities. It's a tough job. They're not super well paid a lot of times. You get a lot of people are talked back. There's a lot of, it's a very stressful situation. And giving another mutual support meeting to a bunch of people who definitely look like they don't want to be there, it's got to be a tough job for some facilitators. The facilitators that give recovery movie meetups actually look forward to giving the meetings. The facilitators at certain treatment centers actually compete with each other as to who gets to give the meeting. That's another great outcome because that helps with staff retention, reduces turnaround, and creates a better community of healing in treatment centers. So we're very proud that that's been one of the collateral benefits of our program is to just help treatment centers have a better time doing their work. Have a more interesting, have a tool that helps them do their work, and also situations where the clients enjoy it.
And pretty low lift, right? And looking at like how it works, it's like, you hand out a recovery movie meetup worksheet. There's a screening, you kind of pause for certain things. You might replay key scenes, and then there's like a discussion. But this isn't like a real significant lift either for implementing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's pretty low lift compared to some other things of what it would take to implement something that would have such an impact like this.
Well, you're right. We wanted to make it very, very easy because I've learned doing this, um, and I learned the hard way. But that change is difficult, anyway. But change is very difficult in organizations that have been doing something the same way for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And so the the adoption of new programming has always been difficult because, like, you have to vet it. Is it clinically valid? You know, do we have time for it? How do we put it in the schedule, etc. It's difficult. So on the one hand, kudos facilitators saying we need new, fresh, new programming. But the idea is that, you know, when was the last time some new, fresh, new, clinically vetted therapeutic programming ever came out? You know, EBT, REBT, CBT that have been around for years, motivational interviewing. Okay, so there's like maybe 10 or 20 modalities or programs that are available. Some are heavy lifting, some are 30 hours of training, some are, like 5 books that have to be digested and cost $100,000. We want to make our our program so much easier. So it's just 2 hours of video training, 1 hour of onboarding, and then it's plug and play. So even like if ever all your staff call out and only one person comes in, all they have to do is take the workbook exercise, read through it really fast, and then just start the meeting. And just start number one, number two, what the movie's about, why it's important, press play. All right, guys, let's do this asking questions. Everybody good? All right, let's go home. It's super super easy to do, and that was important because we didn't want to get into the weeds with all the training and stuff. Super easy, and it's also incredibly intuitive because everybody's watched movies their whole life. They know how to talk about movies. They know how to express their opinions about movies, and they also know how to talk to other people and say, "What did you think of this scene? How does it relate to your life?" Those are natural questions because people have been doing that their whole life because they've been talking to other people about movies that they've watched their whole life.
Circling back to the movie, so one last question before we kind of wrap up is we're circling back to like the concept of film and everything, and then from your book, and then also to recovery meetups. How do you look at the future of how things look with like substances go through change, even
Mhm.
though a lot of things around it are the same. Like we have fentanyl now, and with gambling, there's always been betting on sports, but now there's more online betting. There's like the prediction markets. Like with everything that does go on and change, do you see like where do you see film picking up on things like trends or things that change? Do you see that it's not as risky as it is today compared to earlier on? Like looking forward to how film still has its role as these things continue to go on and change. You ever give any thought to that? Um, just any idea to like what that even like looks like or even how that keeps up because trends come and go, things change. What we knew before, what we know now is not the same. So where do you see how film still plays a role in all that or sticks with the changes that happen?
And as most people know, the film industry is undergoing a lot of changes. The advent of streaming services has really sort of made the film studio model different. So there's less of a bottleneck. There's more buyers, which is better for communication. So more and better stories and more diverse stories can be told. Because if you just have Warner Brothers and Paramount or the stranglehold on green lighting authority and the resources to make movies, because it takes a lot of money to make movies and series. I know that I always used to raise money and put stories. Um, so the economics make it so that like the bottlenecks are for Disney and all these other big movies, big movie stars to make big budget movies, tentpole, Marvel movies, etc. That can make billions because they're really in a scalable business where they have to distribute these movies across vast, worldwide distribution channels, China, etc. And a movie that costs $100 million to make needs to make 300, $400 million overseas or internationally or cumulatively to make money. Now, when you're at a pitch meeting and somebody's saying, "Well, a movie about this guy with a mental health issue and stuff like that," so the executives are like, "Well, that's really not going to make any money, so we're not going to make that movie." Does he save the world? Does he wear a cape? Is this based on a Marvel franchise? Can I sell merchandising based on this? No. Okay, pass. So that bottleneck is now gone because now there's all these other buyers. There's Netflix, there's this, there's that, and still filmmakers will still get through that bottleneck by making movies about mental health, about addiction that are powerful, that have big actors, because some actors don't want to make Marvel movies. They want to be in important movies. They want to make movies that speak about changes. And so there's always going to be movies that come out about it. Keanu Reeves was just in a movie um, in for Apple TV. I can't remember, but he plays a guy who used to be a heroin addict. He's a big actor, and now he has to sort of atone for his sins or whatever, and apologize to people to handle some sort of whatever. Whatever the story is, it's not a great movie, and there's a lot of flaws in it. Whatever, it's a little bit over the top, and you know, the idea that Keanu Reeves could say, "Yeah, I do want to do this," and have it be about heroin addiction. Somebody atones. He's really going through that. I think it's the fourth or fifth step of like going back and apologizing and seeking amends. It's really what this movie's about. We got the movie made. Apple made the movie. I don't know, the cost doesn't really matter, but people are still making movies. People will make movies like that. The Outrun just came out. There's movies that are coming out in the future that have to do with mental health and substance. In fact, there's this group over at the Annenberg School that cracks, that works with filmmakers to make sure that mental health is more adequately and accurately portrayed in movies and TV shows. And they have people going out looking at scripts, doing workshops, and their results have been that there's 45% improvement in how people have been talking about mental health, and there's like a 35% reduction in stigma associated with mental health portrayal in movies and TV shows. There's a 50% correction in how people use phrases that are non-stigmatizing in mental health, like movies and TV series that don't use the word crazy or bonkers or nuts. They use like mental illness, anxiety, depression. They use the clinical terminology of that instead of the stigmatizing terminology. All these things are happening. People are doing things to help this process along, behind the scenes. That's down market. That's up market. I'm down market where movies are actually being utilized. But there are people who are helping plan the content of the movies right now. So I think with mobile, and this leads me to what I think is the most profound thing, is that everybody, in fact, including myself, I'm getting close to this, can use generative AI to make any goddamn movie they want, you know, without anybody's approval, without anybody's funding. I've been able to use Gemini and Flow and several other tools to make some really great content, which I use for marketing purposes, etc. But I think in the future, this is what I predict. And that one of the workshops, and I'll probably create it if it doesn't, nobody creates it for me. There's probably going to be a workshop at some point where there's a bunch of people who are in a treatment facility, let's say, and if they're like, okay, for the next hour, you guys are going to sit at this computer, and I want you to tell your story of what got you addicted and where you are now and where you want to go, and feed it into the prompts of Gemini, and then it's going to spit out the movie, and then let's watch everybody's movie at the end to see what it's like. And so people will be able to see renditions, and then they can scan their faces and have them be in the movie. And people can make their own autobiographical movies right now if they want. But the point is that they could write the ending any way they want. So think about what that opens up for people. To not just wait for a movie to visualize what their life could be like in recovery, but
Wow.
to actually create it themselves.
Yeah, I was not expecting that to be your response to that question. I was not expecting that to be, but that is quite um, fascinating to think about, and the applications of that is really incredible. So thank you for that insight. All right, last thing. Ever our conversation, anything that you have going on, what is it that you would like to leave for listeners as a final takeaway?
Final takeaway is, well, that for those of you that are struggling and still out there and haven't really made a commitment to change, and you're looking for something, there's a lot of different things that you could do, but maybe just sitting down and watching a bunch of movies from Lost Weekend to Flight to everything. Maybe it just tells you something that might be helpful. Maybe it just connects with you on some level, emotionally, whatever. And if it helps, great. If it doesn't, well, or buy my book and see if it changes or entertains you, whatever. Or if you find it interesting, great, fantastic. My job is done. For those of you who work in treatment and you're looking for something different, programming Recovery Movie Meetups is really, really cool. And I think it's working in a lot of different places. We're growing really quickly and something that could be fun. But I think for everybody generally, um, think about and this goes to think about what you're thinking cognitively. Things that I talk about all the time in my own smart recovery meetings and my whole life, and I teach it to my kids. Is that we have total control over the story that we're telling ourselves about reality all the time. And the idea that you're bored or stuck in reality or whatever it is, you're not. Reality is created day by day by your own mind. But you have to take a step outside of it to see yourself and see your future and imagine future possibilities. Have the courage to think big or think crazy or think outside of the box. And not be afraid to do that, and not be deterred by people telling you that's stupid or being embarrassed when people think that's stupid. Just creating whatever future you want for yourself by telling yourself a different story every day, or having necessary inputs like films, movies, TV shows, narratives, novels, plays, anything. Incorporating media not just as a way to like entertain yourself passively, like doom scrolling, but to use that as fuel to create new futures for yourself. I think it's never been a better time to do that because when one person sees doom scrolling, I see as learning, I see as growing. So my feed is very specific to, new ideas. Other people's might be specific to watching people dump buckets of oil on their heads. Well, yeah, that's fine. No judgment here. But there's never been a bigger selection of things and images and visuals to choose from to create any future anybody wants for themselves.
That's great. I will say you're not the first author I've had on the podcast, but you're the first author who has written about movies and film, and it brought back a lot of great memories of the time of using film in treatment, but also gave a much deeper understanding of what it takes and what goes into making them, but also the benefit that it truly does have besides being the substitute teacher, which it's been called. So I want to thank you for the book. Thank you for Recovery Meetups, and we'll have links for people to learn more about it, connect with you if they need to. But it really was an honor having you as a guest on the podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. And thanks for reading the book. I'm glad that you liked it. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience.
One quick thing before you go. If you've gotten value from this show, from this episode, or any other episodes, the best thing you can do to support it is leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm not asking for anything elaborate. Tap the stars, write a sentence or two about what this show means to you. It helps more people in the behavioral health and recovery space find us. I appreciate you more than you know.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media. Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.